The rain hammered against the windshield with the persistence of tiny fists, each drop exploding into crystalline fragments before the wipers swept them away. Sarah Chen squinted through the darkness, her knuckles white against the steering wheel as she navigated the winding mountain road. The GPS on her phone had lost signal 20 minutes ago, leaving her with nothing but the yellow lines disappearing into the black void ahead. She shouldn't have taken the shortcut. The main highway would have added an hour to her drive, but at least it would have kept her on familiar ground. Now somewhere in the hills of rural Oregon, she was beginning to question every decision that had led her here. The antique shop appointment had been scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. Mrs. Hendricks, the estate sale coordinator, had been very specific about timing. The family wants this handled quickly and quietly, she'd said over the phone. Arrive early, catalog what you think might be valuable, and we'll discuss terms. Sarah had driven 8 hours from Portland for this opportunity. Her small antique business was finally gaining traction, and estate sales like this one could make the difference between paying rent and closing shop. The deceased collector, a reclusive man named Edmund Cartwright, had apparently amassed an impressive collection of vintage toys and curiosities over 40 years. A flash of yellow caught her eye through the rain. A weathered sign materialized in her headlights. Pine Ridge, population 847. Below it, someone had spray-painted "God Help Us" in dripping red letters. Sarah slowed the car, unease crawling up her spine like cold fingers. The town beyond the sign was nothing more than a collection of dark buildings huddled together against the storm. Most of the streetlights were broken, casting everything in deep shadows punctuated by the occasional flicker of dying fluorescent bulbs. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Room 12, Cartwright collection in storage unit behind motel, key under mat. Sarah frowned. Mrs. Hendricks had mentioned meeting at the house, not a motel. She tried calling the number back, but the call went straight to a disconnected tone. With no other choice, she drove slowly through Pine Ridge's empty streets until she spotted a neon sign reading Mountain View Motel in faded pink letters. The parking lot was empty except for a rusted pickup truck and her own Honda. She pulled up to room 12, noting how the numbers hung at odd angles, as if the building itself was slowly giving up. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle, but the wind still howled through the pine trees surrounding the property. Sarah knocked on the door. No answer. She checked under the mat and found not just a key, but a small white card with neat handwriting. Miss Chen, had to leave early. Storage unit 23B behind building. Take what you need for evaluation. We'll call tomorrow. Men Hendricks, behind the motel, a row of storage units stretched into the darkness. Most were secured with heavy padlocks, but Unit 23B stood slightly ajar. Sarah hesitated, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. Professional curiosity won out over caution, and she pushed the metal door open. The smell hit her first, a mixture of dust, mildew, and something else. Something organic and sickly sweet, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. Her phone's flashlight revealed a cramped space packed floor to ceiling with boxes, furniture, and collectibles. Victorian dolls sat in neat rows on makeshift shelves, their glassy eyes reflecting her light. Toy trains were arranged on a card table, frozen mid-journey to nowhere. Board games from the 1950s were stacked in precarious towers, and vintage action figures still in their packaging lined the walls. But dominating the back corner was something that made Sarah pause. A large glass display case housed dozens of small figurines, each about 6 inches tall. They appeared to be some kind of designer toy, round bodies, stubby arms, and faces that managed to be both childlike and unsettling. Their expressions were frozen in permanent grins, but their eyes seemed to follow her movement. Sarah approached the case, drawn by professional interest. The figurines were expertly crafted, with attention to detail that suggested they were worth examining. Each one was slightly different colors, different accessories, different poses, but they all shared the same disturbing smile. The small placard at the base of the display case read, "Labubu Collection, Limited Edition Series 150. Handle with extreme care. Do not separate." She'd never heard of Labubu dolls, but the craftsmanship was impressive. If they were truly limited edition, they could be valuable. She took several photos with her phone, planning to research them later. As she documented the collection, Sarah became aware of a sound beneath the rain and wind, a soft scratching like fingernails on wood. She froze, listening. The sound came again, definitely from inside the storage unit. "Hello?" she called out, feeling foolish. "Mrs. Hendricks?" Silence. Then unmistakably, the sound of something small moving among the boxes. Probably just a mouse, Sarah told herself, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. She continued cataloging, working faster now, eager to finish and get back to her car. The scratching sound grew louder, more persistent. Now it seemed to come from multiple directions at once. Sarah swept her phone's light across the storage unit, shadows dancing between the stacked boxes. One of the Victorian dolls had fallen over, its porcelain face cracked against the concrete floor. She hadn't knocked it over. "Okay, that's enough," Sarah muttered, backing toward the door. As she turned to leave, her light passed over the Labubu display case. The case was open. Sarah's mouth went dry. She was certain it had been closed when she arrived. The glass door hung ajar, and several of the figurines were missing from their stands. She counted quickly, 5 empty spaces where dolls should have been. The scratching sound surrounded her now, coming from the walls, the ceiling, the boxes stacked around her. Sarah stumbled toward the exit, her phone's light shaking wildly. As she reached the door, something small and hard struck her shoulder. She spun around, her light catching a flash of movement as one of the missing Labubu dolls scurried behind a stack of board games. Its tiny plastic feet made skittering sounds on the concrete floor. This wasn't possible. Toys didn't move on their own. She was tired, stressed, letting her imagination run wild in a creepy place during a storm. That had to be it. Another doll darted across her path, its permanent grin now seeming malevolent in the flashlight's beam. Then another. Soon all 5 missing figurines were moving around the storage unit, circling her with deliberate purpose. Sarah's rational mind screamed that this was impossible, but her body reacted with pure animal terror. She bolted from the storage unit, slamming the door behind her. The metal rang like a bell in the night air. Her hands shook as she fumbled with her car keys. Behind her, something was scratching at the storage unit door from the inside. Slow, deliberate scratches, as if small hands were trying to claw their way out. Sarah threw herself into the Honda and started the engine. As she backed out of the parking space, her headlights swept across the motel windows. In room 12, a curtain twitched, revealing a pale face watching her from the darkness. She floored the accelerator, tires spinning on the wet asphalt, as she raced back through Pine Ridge. The town's empty streets felt like a maze, each turn leading to another row of dark buildings. Finally, she found the main road and began the long drive back toward civilization. Miles passed before her heart rate began to slow. She told herself it had been stress, maybe carbon monoxide from the old storage unit affecting her perception. Toys didn't come to life. People didn't watch from empty motel rooms. There had to be a logical explanation. Her phone buzzed with a text from the same unknown number. "You forgot something." Sarah glanced at the message, then back at the road. She hadn't forgotten anything. She'd left everything exactly where she'd found it and gotten out as fast as possible. Another text, "Check your bag." Sarah's overnight bag was on the passenger seat where she'd thrown it. She'd packed light for the trip, just a change of clothes, toiletries, and her laptop. There was no reason to check it. But as she drove, she became increasingly aware of a soft rustling sound coming from the bag, like fabric moving against fabric, or like something small shifting around inside. At the next rest stop, Sarah pulled over under a flickering light pole. The parking lot was empty, except for a few long-haul trucks whose drivers were sleeping in their cabs. She grabbed her bag and unzipped it with trembling fingers. There, nestled among her clothes, was one of the Labubu dolls. Its round body was a pale blue color, and it wore a tiny white hat. Its face was turned upward, that permanent smile now seeming to mock her terror. She reached for it, then jerked her hand back as the doll's head slowly rotated to face her. Sarah zipped the bag shut and threw it into the back seat. This was not happening. She was having some kind of breakdown, maybe a reaction to the stress of starting her business. Hallucinations were a symptom of extreme exhaustion, weren't they? She drove for another hour before exhaustion forced her to find a motel. The sleepy inn looked clean and well lit, a welcome contrast to the mountain view. She checked in, requesting a room on the second floor, as far from the parking lot as possible. In room 247, Sarah double-locked the door and shoved a chair against it for good measure. She left her overnight bag in the Honda, unwilling to bring it inside. Whatever was happening to her, she didn't need any additional triggers. The shower was hot and soothing, washing away the grime and terror of the evening. When she emerged, wrapped in the motel's thin towels, she felt more like herself, enough to laugh at least a little at how thoroughly she'd spooked herself. She ordered takeout from the Chinese restaurant down the street and settled in to research Labubu dolls on her laptop. The internet connection was slow, but eventually she found what she was looking for.
The dolls were part of a designer toy line created by an artist in Hong Kong. They'd gained popularity among collectors, particularly in Asia, but had never achieved mainstream success in the United States. Most of the information she found was in Chinese or Japanese, but the translated descriptions painted them as whimsical, innocent collectibles. There was one forum post, however, that made her pause. A collector in Taiwan claimed that his Labubu dolls had started moving on their own after he'd separated them from their original display. Other collectors had ridiculed the post, dismissing it as an attempt to create urban legend around the brand. But buried in the comments was another account, this one from a dealer in California. He'd acquired a collection of 50 Labubu dolls from an estate sale, but had been forced to sell them back to the original family after experiencing unexplained phenomena. The family had paid triple the original price to get them back and had specifically requested that the collection never be separated. Sarah closed the laptop. Coincidence? It had to be. A soft knocking at her door made her freeze. 3 gentle taps, perfectly spaced. "Who is it?" she called out. Silence. The knocking came again, the same 3 taps. Sarah approached the door cautiously and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. She waited, barely breathing, until she heard footsteps moving away from her door. Then she heard another door open and close somewhere down the hall. Sarah was about to return to bed when she noticed something on the floor. A small piece of paper had been slipped under her door. She picked it up with shaking fingers. Written in the same neat handwriting as the card from the storage unit. "They want to go home." That was it. Sarah packed her laptop and called the front desk. "I need to check out early," she said. "Emergency at home." The night clerk was sympathetic and processed her checkout over the phone. Sarah was in her car within 10 minutes, driving through the pre-dawn darkness toward Portland. She'd figure out what to do about the doll in her bag once she got home. But as she merged onto the interstate, Sarah noticed her car was handling strangely. The steering wheel pulled slightly to the right, and there was a subtle vibration through the floorboards. She told herself it was just the wind, or maybe she needed new tires. The vibration grew stronger. At the next rest stop, Sarah pulled over and popped the hood. Everything looked normal under the faint illumination of her phone's flashlight. She walked around the car, checking the tires, all properly inflated, no visible damage. As she opened the driver's door to continue her journey, she heard a sound from the trunk, a soft bumping, like something rolling back and forth. Sarah's blood ran cold. She hadn't put anything in the trunk. The bumping continued as she stood there, perfectly timed with the movement of the car as it settled on its suspension. Something was definitely moving around in there. She opened the trunk with her keys held like a weapon, ready to slam it shut at the first sign of trouble. 5 Labubu dolls sat in a neat row on the trunk's carpet, their backs against the spare tire, the same 5 that had gone missing from the storage unit. Their painted smiles seemed wider in the darkness, and their eyes reflected her phone's light like tiny mirrors. Sarah grabbed the dolls and threw them into the nearby trash can, one by one. Their plastic bodies made hollow sounds as they hit the bottom. She slammed the trunk shut and got back in her car, hands shaking so badly she could barely start the engine. In her rearview mirror, she watched the trash can recede into the distance. Whatever was happening, she was done with it. The dolls could stay there and be someone else's problem. She made it another 50 miles before the vibration returned, stronger than before. This time she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She looked in the trunk again and found those dolls. The sun was rising by the time Sarah reached Portland, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Normal colors, safe colors. She pulled into her apartment complex's parking garage and sat in the car for a long moment, gathering her courage. The trunk was empty, except for her spare tire and emergency kit. Sarah laughed, a sound bordering on hysteria. She'd thrown the dolls away at a rest stop 60 miles south. Of course the trunk was empty. She was losing her mind, that was all. Stress-induced hallucinations brought on by exhaustion and anxiety. In her apartment, she made coffee and tried to process everything that had happened. By daylight, in familiar surroundings, it all seemed impossible. Toys didn't come to life. Dolls didn't follow people home. She'd been tired, stressed, and susceptible to suggestion after being alone in a creepy storage unit during a storm. The rational explanation was always the correct one. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. The caller ID showed the same number that had been texting her. "Hello?" Sarah answered cautiously. "Miss Chen?" The voice was elderly, female, and concerned. "This is Margaret Hendricks. I've been trying to reach you all night. Are you all right?" "Mrs. Hendricks?" Sarah's confusion was complete. "But I got your message. At the motel." "What motel?" "Miss Chen, I left 12 messages on your voicemail yesterday. The estate sale was cancelled. Mr. Cartwright's family decided to handle the collection themselves. I've been worried sick that you'd driven all that way for nothing." Sarah's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "But the storage unit, the key, your note, I don't understand. What storage unit? Mr. Cartwright lived in a house on Elm Street. There was never any motel involved." The phone slipped from Sarah's nerveless fingers, clattering to the kitchen floor. She stared at the apartment around her, suddenly noticing details that hadn't been there when she'd left 2 days ago. On her kitchen counter sat a small blue Labubu doll, wearing a white hat. On her coffee table, another doll, this one pink with tiny overalls. By her front door, a third doll, yellow with a miniature backpack. They were arranged throughout her apartment like a welcoming committee, their plastic smiles unchanged, but their positions unmistakably deliberate. Sarah counted them with growing horror. 5 dolls total, the same 5 from the storage unit. Her rational mind made one last desperate attempt to explain what was happening. She was having a complete breakdown. The stress of starting her business had finally cracked her psyche. The dolls weren't real. The phone call wasn't real. None of this was real. But as she watched, the blue doll on her counter slowly turned its head toward her and smiled. Sarah ran for the door, but it wouldn't open. The deadbolt was unlocked, the chain unlatched, but the door remained sealed as if welded shut. Behind her, the soft sound of plastic feet on hardwood grew louder as the dolls began moving through her apartment. She grabbed her phone from the floor and dialed 911, but the call wouldn't connect. No signal, despite being in the middle of the city. The screen showed full bars, but every number she tried resulted in the same dead silence. The dolls had formed a circle around her now, their heads tilted at identical angles as they watched her growing panic. The rational part of Sarah's mind noted that they moved with too much coordination, too much purpose for toys animated by some unknown force. There was intelligence behind their movements, ancient and patient and utterly alien. One of them spoke, not with a voice, but directly into her mind, the words appearing in her consciousness like drops of ice water. "We've been waiting so long to come home." Sarah's last coherent thought, before the darkness took her, was a memory of the placard in the storage unit. "Do not separate." She had separated them from their collection, had taken them away from the 45 others who waited in their display case, and now they had taken her in return. When the landlord found Sarah's apartment 3 days later, responding to complaints about a foul smell, the police discovered something that defied explanation. The apartment was completely empty except for an ornate glass display case sitting in the center of the living room. Inside the case were 50 identical figurines arranged in neat rows. 49 were clearly toys, plastic collectibles with painted smiles and glassy eyes. But the 50th figure, positioned in the exact center of the display, was different. It was carved from what appeared to be bone or ivory, with intricate detail that suggested human craftsmanship rather than factory production. Its face bore a remarkable resemblance to the missing tenant, Sarah Chen, though its expression was frozen in the same disturbing smile as all the others. The case bore a small placard, Labubu Collection, limited edition series 1 to 50, handle with extreme care, do not separate. The police report noted that Sarah Chen's car was found at a rest stop 60 miles south of Portland, but security cameras showed no evidence of her ever stopping there. Her overnight bag contained only clothes and toiletries. There was no sign of struggle, no indication of where she might have gone. The case of figurines was processed as evidence and stored in a police warehouse, where it remains to this day. Officers who work the night shift sometimes report hearing soft scratching sounds from that section of the warehouse, and the overnight security guard swears he's seen small shadows moving between the shelves, but the official record states that the evidence room is completely secure, and that toys don't move on their own. Everyone knows toys don't move on their own. The case file remains open, but investigators have long since moved on to more pressing matters. After all, people disappear every day, and there's always a rational explanation. There's always a rational explanation.